This is every single game I played in 2022 here in the tier list. All of them are listed here. There's 31, I think. I'm going to go through them in the order I beat them in. Starting us off is Elden Ring. Elden Ring, big official game of the year according to the Game Awards. New game from Software, kind of new evolution of their very well-known Souls format. I got some negative things to say about this game, but I'm gonna have to preface this with, let me check the hours I put into this game. Okay, so the last time I played this game was March 20th, which I believe was like around a month after the game came out. I have 127 hours in this game. I did 3 playthroughs of this game with varying builds, mainly to get all the achievements, which you have to do at least 3 playthroughs for 3 of the different endings. It is quite a few hours. Do the math. It is a lot more time than I probably should be spending during a school semester playing a video game. Start off with some positives. I think the base combat is still like very good. The Souls format heavily rewards like learning how enemies act and reacting and avoiding their attacks accordingly. Also very like big on just understanding enemy patterns and what you're allowed and not allowed to do. And this is also like the first time FromSoft is like tackling an open world game. The previous Souls games have been pretty open. At the very least, I would not call them linear. But like, this is like the most open they've made a Souls game. And I think the amount of freedom given to you and just where you can go is just amazing and is just great for exploration. It reminds me a lot of like back when Breath of the Wild came out and I was playing that. And it's just like, kind of the joke about it's like, oh, you see that? You can go there. It's not as much like that, but kind of just like there's so many areas to explore, and you're very rarely actually gated off from exploring anywhere. And I also think the whole like openness and exploration, combined with the vast amount of build variety that's in this game, I think that's a very nice solution to, I don't want to call it a difficulty problem that previous games have had, but there's like, people have asked for like an easy mode in Souls games. And I think this is kind of like a really nice way where if like someone has come across some kind of challenge that they don't know how to deal with it, they can just like go somewhere else. There's almost like never a time in this game where like one particular boss or area is like the only thing you can do. So if it's proving your trouble, like go somewhere else, level up some more, get some new items. And I think they also made it pretty easy to change your build on the fly. Upgrading weapons is still a decent commitment, but at the very least, the item that lets you respec your levels is like pretty plentiful, and you get it like, you get access to it pretty early on. As well as with the areas you are exploring, I feel like there's a very nice variety, at least with the kind of like general region areas. Of course, I mean, I'll try not to spoil too much, but like some of the more obvious one, like, okay, you start out in the kind of regular grassland area, then there's like a giant swamp, and of course you have kind of like the literal rot that is Caelid, and it's like, yeah, this game provides a pretty nice variety of areas to explore. So I think this game has like, yeah, this section of the game, all the stuff I just talked about, I thought was like done beautifully. I love this part about the game. But I got some gripes about this game. One of my largest issues with not just Elden Ring, but all the other Souls games have this. Or at least I haven't played Demon Souls or Sekiro, but I'm pretty sure like all the other Souls games have these 2 issues I have, which is your dodge, like rolling in these games, is done when you release the button, and I don't know why that's a thing, because like the circle or B button is also tied to like running, so it's like, okay, hold it down to run, and then release the button to roll, or like you quickly tap it, but it basically means every time you try and roll, it's delayed by at least 1 frame, for the average person pressing the button, probably a couple more than that. And it's just like, I don't know why they can't have a dedicated dodge button. Because it just means every time you try to roll, it's like ever so slightly delayed. And if you're trying to time it to like roll at the very last second, I find this very annoying. And Yeah, basically every Soul, I don't know why any of the Souls games can't have a dedicated dodge button. Another thing that really bothers me is like the big buffer. So not only is like the roll button on release, but like whenever you're in hit stun, if you like hit like the roll button, it will buffer a roll when you get out of hit stun, no matter how long the hit stun actually is. So like you can be barely too late to get the roll, and then you'll be forced to roll after the hit stun is over. So you're at best, you're wasting stamina unnecessarily, and then usually at worst, you're just rolling into an enemy's attack that you would not want to have rolled into otherwise. And then I mentioned exploration was like pretty good, but I think a lot of the random caves and dungeons you'd come across throughout the world, I was not a big fan of a lot of those. They were like kind of okay the first couple times, but after a while they became very repetitive. There's a lot of reused assets between them. There were a couple that stood out pretty well, but that was more like the exception and not the rule. A lot of the bosses as well were also just like, well, so many of the bosses were repeated throughout the world. And I know some people like so say like, oh, it's an open world game, but I'm kind of like, I don't really like that as a reason for repeating bosses so much. There's also some bosses that are just like, it's not uncommon for Soulsbot to do like, oh, this is it's like a bot, one of the early bosses becomes just like an enemy later. And it feels like Elden Ring does the opposite, where like regular enemies just will sometimes get boss health bars. And I don't understand it. It feels like they didn't really advertise the amount of bosses, not like they did with like Dark Souls 2, for example. But it still feels like an excuse to just have more bosses. And I found the repetition there to be also, like, very, very annoying. And also, it felt like there was a lot of I have it listed in my notes here. These notes were from earlier this year, but I have listed that there were a lot of multi-enemy bosses. Usually, I'm not a fan of these, and I don't feel like they played the strength of Souls combat very well. Usually with, like, yeah, you have to be very, like, aware and committed to whatever actions you're trying to take. And with like very few exceptions, unless like the boss actually feels like heavily designed around having multiple enemies like Ornstein and Smo or like Phase 2 Sister Freed. It doesn't feel like they're designed around it a lot. And so it feels like you're just sitting there waiting for a really long time for some kind of safe opening. What I can remember is like the stick bug enemies in this game. I don't know what they're called. Like the stick bug enemies that like, I think they have spears and then they shoot out like missiles from their back. There's like one of the bosses, it's just 2 of them and they have boss health bars. And it's like, why? Why would you do this? There's another boss that's just like one of the giant plant monsters with a few smaller plant monsters and it just has a boss health bar. Godskin Duo was like, I think one of the like worst boss experiences I had in the game. So yeah, overall I'm not a fan of multi-enemy bosses unless they're the ones that are just like unique to that fight and designed around it. And then also for some of the bosses, it felt like they have random follow-ups to some of their moves sometimes. The 2 that distinctly come to mind were Beast Clergyman and Melania, where it's like they do one move that is sometimes punishable, and then sometimes they do a follow-up that'll punish you for trying to punish the first move. And with this randomness, it feels like it really goes against kind of like the Souls boss design philosophy, where it's like the whole point is that you learn how these enemies work. And then once you have the knowledge of what they're gonna do and then the execution to react accordingly, you are rewarded with getting to hit them. And then this feels like it goes against it because like sometimes that just won't work. And that like inconsistency feels like very, very annoying, especially for like a game such as Elden Ring that's like in this like FromSoft design. So it's like we have really, really high positives and then some kind of really, really low negatives. Elden Ring I feel like goes in one of these. Because it's like, man, those highs are so high. And it's like going through that game for the first time. There's like parts of that feel really interesting. You just kind of explore, see what you find. But then it's like those bad parts really feel like they bring it down. I think it's like top of good tier or bottom of really good tier. I would put it just there for now. Now next up is Umineko. Umineko is technically divided into 2 games for the first 4 and last 4 chapters of the game, but I count it all as one. So this is a visual novel written by Ryukishi 7. The same dude that is behind Higurashi. And I'll kind of like do my best. It's kind of difficult to talk about it without spoiling, so I'll do my best to not spoil, as I'll do my best with all of these games. It's one of the most unique experiences I think you can have from a mystery novel, or a mystery like story, because it feels like very actively, like Ryukishi the writer very much is aware of what the player is thinking, and then also very, very clearly lays out like what the mystery is and kind of what the rules are of this world. There isn't any kind of like a random thing that's gonna come out of nowhere. One thing I had a little bit of an issue with the mystery was there's an epitaph they introduced to you very early on, and figuring out this epitaph is like, I'm pretty sure you have to know like Japanese geography. So like that part is like a little bit region locked. Overall does not detract, did not, at least for me, detract from the main mystery of what's going on. There's an excellent and large cast of characters you get to know and love all throughout the entire visual novel. It's a little bit slow at times. If you're at all familiar with Higurashi, you'll see like similarities in kind of the format they use for each chapter. Not like, doesn't fully line up, but there's like similarities there, so you know, like usually the starts of each like episode or chapter is like a little bit slower. But I think like how enjoyable the casts are keeps it from ever really getting boring. There's so many great moments in here, and you kind of never know what's about to happen next. As like, there's kind of like a meme between me and my friends about the part, where it's like a lot of times, there's been like, I have not been the only one in my friend group that's read Umineko this year. And basically there's a lot of times we'll kind of like read it in a Discord call. And it's like a video like opens the share screen of the people that have like already played the game. It's like no matter which part they're actually at, they're like, yo guys, get in here, he's at the part. Which just like, every part in this visual novel is the part. It's a little bit long, so it's like, it's definitely a time commitment if you want to rate it. But I think like at the end of the day, it is like, actually, I'm pretty sure this is my favorite visual novel. This is like the best thing I have ever read, and I would be very surprised to find something that would top it. So this is going in peak fiction. So now we are at Super Metroid now. Overall, I'd say this is pretty enjoyable. It's kind of the first like really big Metroid game, and one of the very early pioneers of like the Metroidvania genre. So I think like knowing the genre is very interesting to go and play this after playing a couple other more modern ones. And I think immediately, like you tell from the very start, the atmosphere is like, for a SNES game, this is like really good. It's like, I don't know, like they pulling this off in the I don't remember the exact year this came up, but like in the 90s, the power of the SNES, they did like a really good job like exploring the areas, like being isolated on this alien planet to hunt down the Metroids. It really helped with the immersion there. Also adding to the atmosphere, like Super Metroid has really good soundtrack. Just did like, again, helping with like, help the areas feel distinct, help with the immersion. Just like getting immersed in like exploring this area. The bosses in the game felt kind of okay. They weren't like horrible or anything, but I couldn't exactly say I enjoyed them. But like kind of I had like two big grievances with this game. One is that like I didn't feel like the map properly conveyed where you can actually go to. And by that I mean it doesn't actually show you any unused exits that you have like yet to go through yet. So it's like if you're kind of looking at the map, oh, what doors have I not used yet, or what might be locked off that I now have the key for. As like the map doesn't really tell you that. So there definitely were a couple times I felt a little frustrated while getting lost. And then the other big thing I found kind of annoying was the scan visor and how inconvenient that is to use. I am not at all a fan of randomly bomb this block or or power bomb this block that's only destroyable by this weapon of like being kind of a puzzle for progression. And the scan visor is there to like kind of help with it, but I found like the scan visor being like very, very inconvenient to use. You just have to like stop there, slowly scan up and down, do it in both directions. And it made dealing with that part kind of annoying, but overall it was still pretty good. I still very much enjoyed my time with Super Metroid. I think that would go in, I think it would go here. Super Metroid was like pioneer of the genre. I'm not expecting it to get anything. I'm not expecting it to get everything right, but I'm just saying it's still kind of something that annoyed me while going through it. Our next one up here is Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Speaking of classic Metroidvanias, this is kind of the other big pioneer of the genre alongside Super Metroid. And also, like Super Metroid, I still very much enjoyed it. I think the kind of openness and like exploration of this game is really cool. Like 5 minutes into the game, you're kind of just plopped into Dracula's castle and told, find him and kill him. That's kind of it. You get full reign to explore wherever you want, pretty much. I mean, of course, some areas are going to be gated off by certain items, but yeah, it's extremely open, and you're given so much freedom with how you want to explore Dracula's castle. Though, for some, speaking of upgrades you can get, I admittedly didn't find any of them too interesting, at least in how they really affect Alucard's moveset. Because, like, I mean, some of them are like, okay, the bat, but, like, trying to navigate around areas as the bat isn't, like, too interesting. And that's just, like, one example. Or it's, like, the spike armor, or the armor lets you walk through spikes. It's like, okay, well, I'll equip it for the 2 rooms I have to walk through spikes in. And, like, some of these kind of feel like glorified keys to an extent. Meanwhile, in something like Super Metroid, a lot of these items feel like very big upgrades to your moveset. They're not all winners. But for example, like, the power bomb and, like, the screw attack, for example. I mean, yes, those are both used as keys at points, but they're still, like, really important additions to your moveset. I didn't feel that as much in something like Symphony of the Night. As well, I didn't really enjoy the combat that much. It's definitely, it's like, they've made it to feel a lot more fluid than the very, like, rigid committal actions of, like, the classic Castlevania games. But still, like, slowly swinging at enemies. And then the knockback is something that really annoyed me with this game. Where it's like, yeah, I mean, typically you have to get close to a lot of these enemies to swing at them. But if they, like, so much as tap you, you take, like, the full 50 feet back Castlevania knockback. And it's like, it's very annoying when you're trying to do up-close combat. So it overall was, like, still a very much an enjoyable game, but I think I gotta put it a tier below. But now we're coming up to Ys Origin. So it's really funny. I played Ys 1 last year, and I guess we'll talk about the first 2 Ys games combat when we get to Ys 2 after this. But it's like, I stopped playing Ys after Ys 1, and I played Ys Origin, and if this is a much better starting point than Ys 1. If you're trying to get into the series, don't start with Ys 1. Start with this game if you want to go with a more classic style. There's 3 different campaigns you can do. I did 2 of them. I did Unica's route, and then I did the unlockable characters route. It's a very simple top-down action combat system. It's not great. It's not bad either. Kind of just like go up to enemies, mash in their face, don't be too aggressive. But it's overall, it was enjoyable. I thought you're exploring one big tower throughout the game. And it's interesting because it felt very open, while in reality still being pretty linear. But overall, exploring the tower was interesting. I enjoyed it. As well as the characters. They weren't, like, spectacular, but they're still ones I enjoyed. I was still, like, somewhat invested in the story that was going on. Yeah, overall, it's a very, like, solid top-down action combat game. I don't have too much to say about it, honestly. I think it goes in good tier. Next up, we have Ys 2. So this is the sequel to Ys 1, which, if you don't know the Ys series, this was, I'm pretty sure, like, some of the first action RPGs that came out. And when I say, like, the first action RPGs, when did Ys 2 come out? Ys 2 came out in 1988. I played the PC version, which is a remake, or it's like a port of the PSP remake, I believe. But this plays like an action RPG from 1988. If you're at all familiar with Hydlide, it has a similar combat system where you run into enemies, and that is the attack. And as you can imagine, it has not aged well. At the very least, I can say with Ys 2 here, once you figure out you can go in, because basically you just gotta run into enemies and hope they don't attack, or hope they don't hit you back, and you kill them before they kill you. It isn't the most engaging system. And then eventually you learn that if you run into enemies diagonally, they actually can't attack you back. And then the combat system is kind of broken for the rest of the game after that. Compared to Ys 1, they actually did add a magic system. While not very in-depth, there are a few interesting spells in here. You get a ranged attack option, so overall this was very much welcome. Almost every kind of dungeon map in this game was like very annoying to navigate. You're not really given any kind of map to look at, and there's so many areas that feel similar. And I ended up having to I'd have to look up a map. I'd have to Google a map and then use that to navigate around these places, just to like save myself from just like fumbling around and hoping for the best. The story was generally pretty basic. You're 1988 RPG protagonist. Go save the goddesses from evil dudes doing the evil things. If you've played Ys Origin before this, there are a couple neat references. At least for me, it didn't really do too much to enhance the game, but it's like, it'll help a little bit. I know for one of my friends that's also played Origin and then Ys 2 after, said that was a lot more helpful for him, so I guess maybe it depends on who you are. Overall, I could say it was better than the first game, but not one I would necessarily recommend to people, and I think goes in the know what you're getting into tier. There is stuff you can get out of this. I think it's still interesting, the idea of playing an action RPG that was made in 1988. I think that idea is still like kinda interesting, but you kinda gotta know there are some problems you will be facing for that. And then next up, we have Amnesia: The Dark Descent. A very, very well-known horror game back from, when did this come out, like 2011? Back in that like early YouTube era. I'm sure many people have heard of this game. And I feel like this game was an excellent horror experience, and a big part of that is it feels like Frictional Games, the developers, has a very good understanding of horror, and they have a really good understanding of like what the player is probably thinking. Obviously, it won't apply to everyone, but I feel like it applied to me very well. They do like a really good job of like, I don't want to like spoil too much, but they do like a really good job of like getting in the player's head and really never making you feel safe throughout the game. And also the story of this game, the premise, is you essentially wake up in a castle you wake up with amnesia, like the title of the game. You wake up with amnesia and you read a note from yourself telling you to, what's his name, Alexander? You gotta kill Alexander. And then you have to explore the castle to do that. And as a really interesting storytelling thing where basically you are reading all of your old notes and diaries. And as you're like exploring the castle to reach the climax, you're like slowly remembering all the things that happened. And it was a really interesting way to do storytelling. It's not something I've really seen done like that before, because the notes for lore is like something very commonly done in horror games. Notes like adding to the lore or backstory. But here it's kind of used as like it's used as that, as well as like kind of the main storytelling, as both yourself and Daniel, the protagonist, catch up to what is really going on here in the castle. And then while you're exploring the castle, it's also a lot of fun. There's a lot of variation in the type of, even just like medieval castle, there's a lot of different types of areas you're going to be exploring. A few different types of monsters you're going to have to face. I also think, like, making you feel uneasy, they do a really good job, like, kind of hinting at the monster and never really giving you a good look of what the monster is like. And I think another thing this game does really well is the Penumbra games is what Frictional made before Amnesia. They learned, well, we'll talk about Penumbra later because all three of those games are on this list. But Frictional learned a lot from those games. And one of the big things was kind of making sure you like don't ever get frustrated, because when you get frustrated in a horror game, you're no longer scared. You're just kind of angry at after. And that really takes away the tension from any kind of monster they want you to fear. You kind of like feel in danger, but that you're never really going to get stuck on any one thing for too long. I guess it's hard to describe, but I think if you've played this game, I highly recommend checking out like the commentary, like the dev commentary that's offered by this game. But yeah, where this goes, I honestly think this goes in Godlike. Keeping up with the horror theming, we got Dead Space 1, back from 2008. It's hard to believe this game is actually that old, but it felt very similar to playing something like Resident Evil 4, where basically like a third-person survival horror shooter, slowly upgrading yourself throughout the game. There's a really big emphasis on aiming in Dead Space, because to kill enemies, like unlike a lot of horror games that normally ask you to just shoot the head, or shoot a weak point. In Dead Space, your goal is to actually, like, de-limb any of the enemies. And so I think that, again, like, helps with, like, the emphasis on aiming, rather trying to, like, shoot an arm and or a leg off. And then that'll also affect, like, how the enemy tries to get to you. Like, I don't know, first wanna, like, the legs might be moving around a lot, but if you shoot him, it'll severely prevent the enemy from getting towards you easier. And I think Dead Space did a really good job of, like, making you, Isaac Clarke, feel very strong, but also making the enemies even stronger. And I think that's really important, because it gives you a very fun toolkit to play with, but also doesn't really take away, like, it never really makes you feel overpowered, because you have this amazing toolkit to deal with these really powerful enemies. And speaking of that kit, there's a nice amount of variety. A lot of different ways to deal with the enemies. Like, you kind of start with, like, the regular pistol that can either shoot horizontally or vertically in a small line. Or you get the line gun that does, like, a very wide line. Or you just kind of get, like, a machine gun. There's a good amount of variety in this game. There's also, in reality, abundance of items that you'll collect throughout the game, but even throughout all of it, I still always feared that I would potentially be running out, so I tried to conserve them wisely. I wasn't huge on the story for the game. It felt like it was kind of hinting at something. It didn't feel like a massive revelation that I really cared about at the end. It wasn't bad, but like one thing that really annoyed me with the story is like it always feel like you basically you basically arrive on your ship to a giant space station that has recently been infested with a bunch of aliens. And it feels like every kind of plot point, it's like, oh, we gotta go repair the engine. And then you repair the engine, it's like, oh no, the wing's broken now. Like, okay, they don't need wings in space, but like, you get what I mean. It felt like very arbitrary goals that they set you on. And it's like, every time you complete one goal, 2 more pop up. It felt like kind of like a comedy at times. So it wasn't horrible, but I wasn't a big fan. I can't say I was a fan of the story. There's a bunch of, I was mentioned earlier, like horror games have a bunch of logs for you to investigate for like kind of discover what had been going on the ship, and overall I enjoyed those a lot. And I also do have to say the atmosphere while exploring the ship was like very good. You can kind of see like this ship was kind of lived in a little bit, but you can see like it is extremely decayed. There's not a lot of good things going on here anymore. Okay, the atmosphere like kind of made you feel on edge, but this game has a few jump scares, and they're all like really bad. Like there's a lot of points where like they'll try to make an enemy pop out, and they'll play like a jump scare noise with it. But like, there's a lot of points where like an enemy pops out, but I didn't even notice the enemy was there. And it's like, I just hear the jump scare noise, and it feels like it's playing for no reason. Felt like very, very cheap. But usually I'd end up laughing at those moments. But for where Dead Space goes, I feel like it goes in the really good tier here. Still an overall enjoyable experience. Our next one is Fortnite 2. If you did not know Fortnite has a sequel, it is available on itch.io right now. And I kind of think this game came out in 2022, and I think it's my game of the year. It has amazing graphics, you got multiple areas to explore, got an unrelenting villain that'll chase you down no matter what, as well as multiple endings. It's kind of just the complete package, and I'm pretty sure it goes in peak fiction tier. This is also the icon for the game. It didn't really have an official title page, so this is what I'm using. But next up we have Fatal Frame 2, and I'll establish right now that I emulated the Wii version to play the game. And unfortunately, only after I played the game that I found out that the PS2 version is probably better. I know this is like kind of This is kind of well regarded as like very classic and beloved horror game. I unfortunately was not that big a fan of it. Again, emulated the Wii version, so there might have been issues there. Overall, I think the atmosphere was good. You play as these two sisters that are just hanging out, like playing in the woods a little bit, and they basically come across a spooky ghost Japanese village. Then they have to find some way to escape after. Story felt kinda okay. I was invested to like figure out what was going on in the village. So it did a good job getting me to care there. The characters, I don't know if I cared about the characters all that much. And I think the railroading in the game was a little bit annoying. There's sections where you're kind of presented like you can very freely explore the town, but there's really only one thing you can do. So it felt very linear in the end, and as well as some of the goals you had to accomplish feel like very, very arbitrary. Like there's story points they wanted to get across, but they didn't really have a way to work them in easily. Again, mentioning like Dead Space and Amnesia, you got the classic horror game notes around to give you the lore about what's going on, and these are usually what I found the most interesting in terms of the story, and like slowly piecing together what exactly this village is and what it's about. But I think overall the largest issue I had with this game was the combat, because it just feels like there is so much waiting going on. You basically sit there, wait for the enemy to get relatively close, shoot him with your camera, and then they have like 50 million years of hit stun, and then repeat. It very rarely ever felt like it was difficult, but it went on for so long. And the game also has the fatal frame system from the name of the game, where if like an enemy is up close and about to attack you, you can get like a critical shot that deals more damage. But this mechanic felt very inconsistent with usually the fatal frame like indicator not showing up. I know, overall I feel like enemies I think just had like way too much health. I think if you like have the health of all the enemies, I think I would have enjoyed it more. But yeah, there's just so much waiting during combat. I could not enjoy it or be engaged with it at all. There's also, every time you want to reach for an item, you have to like hold down the A button to reach for the item, and sometimes a little grabby ghost hand comes out to attack you. And then, like, sort of screen flash jump scare happens if you get hit. So you have to, like, bait your hand back. But, like, it's literally impossible to react to if the ghost hand is actually there. So you basically have to, like, slowly, like, tap and release the A button to bait it out if it is there. And for every single item you pick up. And it's like, oh my god. I don't think I would have minded it so much if there was, like, I guess a greater consequence to it. And if, like, reacting to the ghost hand felt a lot more reasonable. Because I don't think it's actually the worst idea on paper. Because I think, okay, in like survival horror, you could have like kind of the fear of like, I mean, of course you could just make it like the enemy scary in the first place, but then there's also the fear of like losing your resources. But in general, I didn't really feel like they take away a little bit of your health, but I don't remember health items like ever really being in like really short supply. So I think that it actually like wasn't the worst idea. It just like, well, unfortunately wasn't executed all that well. But yeah, I honestly like, I don't know if I want to put this in okay or bad tier. This was honestly okay at best for me. You know, what am I looking through the list here? You know what? I think I'm gonna put, we'll come back later. We can change the placements after. Next up, we got more classic horror games with Silent Hill 1, which overall I thought it was an alright experience. It felt generally very open. There's very little guidance you're given throughout the game. You kind of have your goal to find what was his name, Harry? You gotta find your missing daughter. But yeah, this game gives you very little guidance with what you're trying to actually do. And I did find it a little bit annoying at times, trying to explore the actual town of Silent Hill itself. Just going along the houses, hopefully seeing there's something I can interact with. I have as one of my notes, inconsistency with item usage, and I'm trying to remember what that means. I think it might be, so take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. I'm pretty sure this is like, some items are automatically used when you interact with the object you're supposed to use said item with, and then some items you're supposed to walk up to the object first, and then go into your inventory and use the item from there. And that kind of inconsistency is, assuming that is what was going on there, that is very frustrating. You definitely notice, I feel like inconsistency with game mechanics and not being able to rely on, like, even, like, basic things you've learned about the game is, something that definitely frustrates me in games. Combat overall was, like, kind of okay. You're definitely not at all supposed to feel powerful in a game like Silent Hill. So running away from or around enemies is typically a very, very viable option, something you will do quite often. One thing is, I know some people might give me flack for like criticizing a like 90s horror game for this, but the camera, oh man, I did not like the camera in this game. And it's like particularly when you're trying to explore certain indoor areas, and there's a lot of rooms where the starting camera angle does not at all show you what is going on in the room. And usually the camera orientation button was not always a great help. But there's so many times where like you enter a room and like enemies are intentionally placed off the like camera. Or like the camera is facing like where you came from, so you can't see anything about the room you just entered. And that'd feel like pretty annoying at times. The story I also felt was like pretty hit or miss. I was like kind of interested in seeing what was going on. I mean, with any, like you go to the town of Silent Hill and there's like suddenly monsters going on there. I'm kind of interested in what kind of explanation are they gonna give for why this is happening. So I've definitely invested to figure that out. And then again, like classic horror game, there's a whole bunch of notes scattered about to slowly uncover what has been happening. And yeah, overall enjoyed those for uncovering the lore, explaining more about what is going on. Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, no, Fatal Frame goes in the bad tier. Because Silent Hill 1 is going in the okay tier, and I know I liked it a lot more than Fatal Frame 2. And then immediately after Silent Hill 1, we have Silent Hill 2. A lot of my points are similar to the first game. Again, it's like very open, there's not a lot of guidance this game gives you. Exploring the actual town of Silent Hill isn't the most enjoyable at times. For the actual combat itself, I found it slightly worse than the first game, partially just due to the lack of variety with a lot of enemies. I know part of Silent Hill is like the enemies will usually tie in to at least one of the characters, and the enemies that are here in Silent Hill 2 do actually like have that symbolism work out very well. But overall, it's like the lack of enemy variety was not, or lessened the combat a little bit for me. And then the story also did feel like a little bit annoying at times. A lot of character actions like really didn't feel realistic, and people weren't like asking the questions that I feel like you'd be asking in these situations, with like a lot of goals like feeling arbitrary at times. And then kind of without trying to spoil Silent Hill 1, I will say it feels very weird that the explanation they gave for like kind of why the monsters are there in Silent Hill 1, that there is like no acknowledgement of that in Silent Hill 2. Yet the monsters are still there. So that definitely felt off for me. But I do still think kind of the story with James and like the reveal that ends up happening, I think that part is still very well done. So I think this had like higher highs in terms of story than the first game. And then of course also still has like the classic horror game notes, slowly uncovering the lore. I've said this quite a few times already. But I think overall it goes in the okay tier. I know a lot of people like Silent Hill 2 more than the first at the very least, but I think overall experience, it was like higher highs and lower lows compared to the first game for me. Next up, we have ATRI, My Dear Moment. This is a visual novel. Overall, I think it was very good. The story was like overall solid. I feel like compared to a lot of other visual novels I've read, it doesn't really reach those really high highs that some of those had, but at the same time, it never really has what I could say a bad moment. Usually it is either some kind of serious story moment, or it's just having a lot of either like fun comedy stuff going on. And oh yeah, the actual story for this game, I feel like I should probably go over stories more for some of the lesser known games that aren't like Silent Hill. You basically play as, I forget his name, but you essentially find a little robot girl that I think his grandma made? Yeah, the story is basically about living with her and uncovering a little bit about both yours and this robot's past. The art is really good. I think all the characters look really good. Got a lot of great sprites in here. And then the background images in this game actually like really stood out for me compared to a lot of other VNs I've read. They were just like done extremely well. This game also takes place in, I don't know if I'd like, not really full on dystopian, but it like takes place on like an Earth where the water level has risen a lot. And so there's like a lot of really cool environments and backgrounds that you get to see as a result. And just like overall, the art is just done extremely well. Story takes a lot of interesting turns. As you can imagine, the idea of this kind of sentient robot, like they kind of like address a lot of the questions you might have, which is like kind of hard to say without like going into too much. As you can imagine, it is there's like romance going on, and you can imagine they will address if you're questioning what's going on between a human and a robot, they'll try and answer your questions. But yeah, overall it's a lot of fun characters, a lot of fun dynamics with them, and I think it overall just makes for a very solid experience. I think it goes in really good up here. Next up, we have Iron Lung. This is a very short but really good horror game experience where you have been tasked to navigate a blood ocean on an alien moon with a submarine. The problem is this submarine has absolutely no like windows, so you are just stuck in the Iron Lung, I believe is what it's called. And you have to go take pictures of a bunch of different places. And the way you navigate is you have to just like check your map and look at the coordinates. And like the inside of your ship tells you what your coordinates are. So you literally just navigate with coordinates and then we'll take pictures. And I think I didn't really realize, Pyrocynical made a video about this game. And I think it really helped me realize some of like the really big strengths of this game, because basically there's a camera at the front of your submarine, and basically you can like take a picture, and then a few seconds later you can go to the back of your sub to see what the picture is. And there is like such a big suspense every time you take a picture, because there's that like couple second delay for it to actually be processed and show up on the panel. That was done really well. And then another thing Pyro brought up is the fact that the game really isn't visually stimulating puts a lot more emphasis on the sound. And the sound design is just so good because you feel so vulnerable. Like, what, big fish attacks your submarine? What are you gonna do about it? So like the random sounds and things going on outside the sub. And again, you never, like, you have the camera that can take photos, but you never have a good idea of what is going on outside. So definitely like one where you feel like very, very tense, very on edge all throughout. It's one that the game costs $2 and lasts like about an hour. It lasts like an hour, and this was also made by the same guy that made Dusk. David Zimansky, I believe is how you say it. But yeah, this is like an very, very short and very, very enjoyable and well done experience. So I honestly think this goes in godlike tier. I haven't really brought up so far, but I feel like kind of feeling developer intentions is something that I really appreciate in something like a horror game. Like I mentioned with I didn't directly say it, but like I mentioned Amnesia, like the fact that they like really like feel like they have an understanding what's going on in the player's head. After a couple games of break, we got to Silent Hill 3, where it's like kind of like with Silent Hill 2, it's like good. Very like similar points to the games that came before it, but I think this one felt considerably worse. And I think going in, I had the impression that this and Silent Hill 2 were like considered the best, or like this or Silent Hill 2 is like considered people's like best game in the series. So I might have hyped it up a little bit in my head, but oh man, I don't think I enjoyed this one. I think especially the first like third or half of this game felt like there really wasn't any kind of rhyme or reason behind the objectives we're doing. Like, because the first big chunk of the game is you're literally just trying to get home from the mall. And then like supernatural stuff is happening, but it's like, I didn't really feel invested at all. And then like enemies also felt very annoying. And then what felt like a greater emphasis on combat, I think like very much brought this game down for me. I didn't really talk about it for the first two games, but like in all three of these games, kind of one of my gripes is like, it feels like they never really acknowledge that there's really fucked up stuff going on. It's like, okay, there's the funny pizza line from 2, but it's like, there's never, like, maybe besides, like, the first encounters with any of the monsters, there's no, like, what the hell is going on? Why am I being taken to, like, spooky horrorland? Where are all these monsters coming from? It's like, I don't know, I feel like those are reasonable and realistic responses, assuming these are just, like, normal people protagonists. And it feels like that never really happens. Overall, yeah, 3 felt much worse, and I think goes in the actual bad tier. Now we got Dead Space 2, continuing on the Dead Space series. 3 is unfortunately not on here. I did not get to finish, I've yet to finish that one. But again, like very similar to the first game. I think had a lot more variation with the weapons, and a little more with actually like where you're kind of exploring as well. Because you get like a much larger, it's supposed to be like a civilian city ship, I'm pretty sure, is like where Dead Space 2 takes place. But there's like more varied weapons, so there's a lot more fun to be had there. But I think like the level design towards the end also takes a little bit of a hit. I unfortunately don't have much to say about 2 that I didn't have to say about 1. I feel very similarly about it to the first game. I'm putting 2 next to each other for the sake of it. It's still like a very, very enjoyable third-person shooter survival horror experience. I feel like the level design kind of takes a little bit of a hit towards the end, but overall, pretty good. Continuing the horror games, we got Little Nightmares. Overall, felt like a solid experience. One thing that really drew me into this game was kind of like the idea of the world and the like aesthetic it brings on. This really reminds me of like you know how in the Coraline movie, the regular human world is like absolutely disgusting? This reminds me of that. And that's a compliment, to be clear. While the gameplay is kind of like avoiding enemies with generally basic stealth, but usually there's some kind of thing going on in the environment to change up each kind of encounter you have with an enemy. Overall, I'll be honest, I had no idea what was going on in the story throughout it. I think like the protagonist was getting a little bit corrupted, but overall, like, and it felt really funny watching a summary video at the end of it. It's like, wow. I don't know if it just, like, completely went over my head. I had no idea what was going on towards the end, or, like, kind of what the kind of main story that was going on. I understand it now, but, it definitely, I'm not sure how much they really want you to know, because unlike a lot of the other horror games I've been talking about, this game does not have any kind of, like, notes or anything, or basically no, like, very written story that happens. But overall, it felt like a very, very solid experience. The stories, like, kind of wake up, and then survive. Just like go through these levels, avoid the enemies, they want to eat you. Yeah, it feels like a harder one to talk about. I mean, some of these are me trying to, like, I have notes here, but even like then trying to recall certain details doesn't feel the easiest. I feel like it goes here. Now we have Lobotomy Corporation Monster Management Simulator, where if you don't know what this game is, basically the Library of Ruina is the much more popular game by Project Moon, the developers, and Ruina is the direct sequel to this game, where in Lobotomy Corp, you basically manage an SCP facility. This game has no direct relation to the SCP facility, but it definitely gives off a very similar vibe, where basically, like, almost every day you add a new kind of anomaly or monster into your facility, and make sure they don't breach containment. The way that works is you basically hire people to work in your facility, and send people to, like, work with the monsters, which your main goal is to just generate the energy that happens from that, and there is just a lot of RNG potential that goes on in this game, with basically, for the most part, like, what kind of monsters will come into your facility. Because, like, at the start of each, like, most of the days, they'll present you 3 monsters, give you very vague descriptions, and then ask you to pick one that has to be in your facility now. And as you can imagine, there's just, like, so much variation, and, like, imagine there's a lot, like, there's definitely a wide gap between, like, the dangers that some of these SCPs can possess. So there's definitely a lot of it. This game can be a little bit BG's sometimes. And there's also a lot of trial and error when trying to figure out how some of these monsters work. Because, like, you can assign the people to do different types types of work with the monster. But of course, like, they'll respond differently to the types of work, but when you first get the monster, you'll have no idea which one is gonna be best. Then, like, as you get more energy with the monster, you can slowly uncover, like, the exact details. But there can be a lot of trial and error going on. And with some of the challenges that this game provides you with and some of the missions, there can actually be a lot of interesting strats you can come up with. That not always the most fun to execute, but generally very enjoyable to, like, come up with them and then sometimes see them play out. And there's also, like, again, with a lot of the RNG potential, there's a lot of different things that can go on, that can go on and go wrong when trying to manage your facility. And so, like, trying to come up with, like, on-the-fly strats and think about how you're going to deal with this can be pretty enjoyable. I think the biggest draw of this game, though, is the story and characters, where basically there's a whole bunch of different facilities, and all the leaders of these facilities basically get their own arcs as you kind of, like, uncover what their backstories are and have their, like, own, like, personal issues that they gotta get over. And I think that overall is what makes me put it in godlike tier. It's one that I feel like a lot of people are hesitant to get into, but one that I feel like, I don't think I ever want to play this game again, but oh my god, it is a godlike game, and it's definitely one I recommend to people. It's an experience that I don't think much else will be able to provide to you. Next up, we have We Were Here. This is the first in the We Were Here series. I've only played this one, but it is basically an escape room style puzzle co-op game. So I played this with a VTuber buddy of mine on stream. We got through it with about like 90-ish minutes. But yeah, there's like a huge emphasis on communication, because you're basically, both of you both spawn in two different areas. And actually throughout the entirety of We Were Here, you do not get to see the other player. So they're provided with rooms and environments that the only way that you can actually figure out what's going on over there is with communication. And then there's a lot of varied and interesting puzzles that can come with that. And I think it does a really good job, like, making it very, very simple at first, and then, like, ramping up the difficulty and making sure you have to, like, be very fast with your communication and clear. So I think it's definitely one that it's like an excellent co-op experience, a lot of cool puzzles. And this game is also, again, like, it's like a 90-minute game. It's free to play. So honestly, I think this one is, like, very easy to recommend to people. Just, like, if it sounds interesting to you, grab a friend, get in call, and play this one together. I think this goes in really good here. And then now we got yet another kind of classic horror game with F.E.A.R. This was 2005. So 2005 FPS game. This was made by the same people that made Condemned Criminal Origins, which I had played years ago. This was really interesting to see one of their other works. It very much, like, kind of gave that vibe of, like, a very classic FPS. I mean, it came from, like, 2005. Kind of got that vibe from it, which I very much enjoyed. The game provides you with a time-slow mechanic, which you don't get infinite use of, but I think was very nice, and being able to, like, save yourself if an enemy comes up behind you, or, like, even play more aggressive with enemies, which I think overall, like, made fights a lot more enjoyable without really feeling super overpowered, because usually you couldn't clear like one whole group most of the time just with one use of it. Story for me wasn't a big motivator. Your kind of main goal is like the F.E.A.R squad is like dealing with the like government group dealing with paranormal activities. And I think there was like one guy with like psychic powers that's like broken free, you gotta go stop. But overall the story did not feel like a major contributing factor to why I was playing through the game. There's also decent like gun variation for when you're doing these fights, and a lot of times you don't just come across ammo. Like one gun runs out of ammo, you're gonna have to pick up another one, and it's very difficult to stick with like one or two of the same gun for the entire game. And I'm pretty sure they only give you 3 different weapon slots, so you have to sometimes like make decisions on which one you want to bring along. So there's a little bit of that decision making with your inventory management. I feel like I need to split this tier up, but I feel like F.E.A.R goes in the really good tier. And then before we get to F.E.A.R 2, we gotta go through Unsorted VHS, which if you have not heard of this game, this is a very few people have actually like played this game. It is just I got DM'd by a friend. This is a $2 itch.io game. It looked a little bit interesting based on the page. I figured, sure, it's $2. Why not? Very similar to Iron Lung. This is a very short and very enjoyable horror experience. It's like basically you're just told there's a box of tapes in front of you. Watch them. And you slowly uncover there's a funky thing going on with these set of cabins where you can teleport between them, and a foundation that may or may not be researching into it. And while watching these tapes, you kind of do your best to figure out what is going on here. But overall, like, you might not expect from like a $2 itch.io game, but this game stood out a lot to me. And I feel like very similar to, I don't know if there's like any developer interviews for this game. I'd love to talk to the dude that made this game, because similar to something like Amnesia, it just felt like there was such a good awareness of what is going on through the player's head, and an excellent understanding of trying to make you scared of what might be out there, regardless of what is actually out there. There's an excellent feeling of isolation all throughout the game. There's not a single person you get to directly talk to. They always feel like very alone. Always feels like someone is watching you. And like every time you can basically like input the tapes, and then you kind of like get to play the tape yourself. But like every time you like eject a tape and go back to kind of the main surveillance room where you're watching them, like I was always scared of, oh, did this one thing I did in the tape maybe change something? Is there gonna be like a dude sneaking up behind me when I eject the tape now? So it felt like a very organic way of trying to scare you. It did not feel like cheap at all. And like overall, it made for an experience where I was basically on the edge of my seat like the entire time. Again, just like excellent awareness of how the player may or may not be scared, and like how they might be fearing what is out there. And I think it goes in the godlike tier. The game is only about like half an hour, so it's definitely shorter than something like Iron Lung, but oh my god, I think if you're a horror fan, I highly recommend checking this one out. Now we are back to the F.E.A.R games with F.E.A.R 2, which a little bit similar to Dead Space 2 is like, I feel like slightly lesser than F.E.A.R 1. Actually, this might be a tier lower. It's still like pretty, like you still kind of got that classic FPS vibe a little bit. You got like cycling through your guns and such. The story felt a little bit more annoying because it felt like there was more emphasis on it while still not being particularly engaging. I feel like it goes in the good tier. It's still good. Like it's called good tier for a reason. Penumbra Overture. So I hinted at it a little bit earlier. The Penumbra series is the series of games that Frictional Games made before they made the Amnesia games. And you can I definitely like could tell it's like, okay, this is made by Frictional. They got similar ideas for horror. They got kind of like the puzzle aspects in there as well. And I think Overture starts out really well. You play, I believe you're investigating your dad's, I think he like sends you an email, you're investigating his research, which takes you out to like some bunker in Greenland, I think? I think the more you go through the game, it kind of decreases a little, like more and more in quality, but still makes for a really good experience. I think one of the worst things that brings this game down for me is the combat, which if you've played Amnesia or even Soma, which is another horror game that Frictional has made, as you know, those games don't have combat. This is, I'm pretty sure, the only game Frictional has made with combat. Like, even, we'll get to the sequel in a second. Like, they took out combat after the first game. Because it was not good. It feels incredibly clunky. That's, like, very annoying to control. You can get the hang of it. Or you can also abuse, like, standing on top of objects where enemies can't hit you. And it allows you to kill some enemies. Which, as you can imagine, the fact that these enemies can be killed with, like, I don't want to say with ease, but without, like, some kind of resource being expended from the player. And that definitely takes away so much of the horror once you realize, oh, these spooky dogs that are chasing you around and outrun you, just hop on top of a box and hope your patience does not wear out as you try and kill them. There are also a couple chase sequences throughout the game where that's like kind of the dev commentary in Amnesia like actually addresses these, where they realize like, yeah, if you're going through these chase sequences and like people are dying over and over, it's like they kind of realize that takes away a lot of the horror. It becomes a lot less enjoyable. You just kind of get frustrated. You're no longer feeling the fear that they want you to fear. I also think the enemies get like a little bit too much like exposure, and kind of like, again, like knowing you can kill the enemies or just like kind of understanding the enemies. Once you like kind of understand them and break them down into mechanics, it gets, again, a lot of that fear is taken away after. So you can definitely tell this is like a little bit of a rough, but like you can kind of see where a developer like Frictional started. And this was like, seemed like you can tell is like a very important stepping stone that allowed them to eventually make the Amnesia game. Okay, I think, where do I want to put Penumbra Overture? I feel like it goes in the really good tier. I feel like I might want to have a tier underneath here. I'm just going to make a new, let's add row above. I don't know what I'm going to call this tier. That's where Penumbra Overture is going. It's in between these two sets of games. Immediately after, we have Penumbra's direct sequel, Penumbra Black Plague. It feels a little bit difficult to talk about the story at all without kind of spoiling Overture a little bit. But essentially you are exploring, like, you get to uncover a lot more about what was going on with your dad's research. And it actually, like, again, like I said during Overture, but like, they did take in fan feedback. There's no more dog enemies, and there's no more combat. You are now at the mercy of your enemies. Or not the mercy, but you have to, like, you can't directly fight them. You gotta run away and hide now. And I also felt like the enemies were a decent amount more scary this time around, because, like, there's a lot less, like, exposure to them and, like, understanding about kind of what they are. And that kind of lack of understanding does help add to the horror a little bit. I felt like towards the end, it wasn't as entertaining. There was, like, a few plot points that did annoy me. I can't really say what they are without major spoilers. But there's definitely some very, like, it felt like very convenient plot points that were not particularly written in well. So I feel like it'd be, I don't know, I'd say roughly equal to the first. These are, like, honestly, again, still, like, anything good or above is stuff I recommend very highly still. But these tiers are mostly here to be relative to each other. And then we have the third and final Penumbra game is Penumbra Requiem, which is actually just a puzzle game. It does actually continue the story from Black Plague, but it's literally just all puzzles. There's no any kind of exploring areas. It doesn't really go into, like, the horror aspects that the first two games go into. So literally just puzzle rooms. Puzzle rooms that you could have seen in Overture and Black Plague. Which they actually did, like, a really good job. Even the environments for how they present the puzzles to you were very, like, a lot of nice variation within them. It was cool, like, there's a little bit of exploration within these puzzle rooms, to be fair. It does kind of continue and, like, conclude the story of Penumbra, but didn't really feel like it made a major impact on me. Because essentially, like, you have, like, the first, like, 2 minutes sets up the story, and then there's no story until the very end. And how long is Requiem? I forget how long. Okay, it's like 3 hours, which is, like, I believe half-ish what the first two games are. Yeah, I think it goes up here, where it's like, yeah. But yeah, overall, like, still solid. You kinda, it's probably recommended to play the first two games, to, like, kinda understand why it's happening. But it's like, if you just want a puzzle experience at the end, it's not bad. I guess our last horror game, or our last, like, kinda classic horror game that is not an RPG Maker game, and that is Cry of F.E.A.R, which is a Half-Life mod that came out in 2012, I believe, where you play as this kid, Simon, who is trying to basically get home from his day in Sweden. But all sorts of horrific things and monsters are happening, and he has to find some way to survive and get home. I think overall the exploring of areas in this game was very well. A lot of nice environments, great use of darkness. There's a lot of tight corridors that can make you scared of what could be popping out. And a lot of spooky ambushes that can happen with enemies. There's definitely a lot of moments where the game is gonna make you panic. Like, this enemy is in your face and trying to kill you. You gotta deal with it right now. You gotta be ready for it. There's a very big feeling of isolation. There are a few characters you will meet throughout the game, but basically throughout any kind of section, you are Simon alone. There's actually pretty good enemy variety. There's a little bit of weapon variety as well. You have a couple melee weapons, but for the most part, you use guns to deal with enemies. There was a little bit of an annoyance with item management in this game. Or it's like, there was item management in this game and a little bit of decision making, because you can't take literally every gun you come across. So you kind of do have to decide, okay, maybe this time this gun has to be left behind. And there is also a little bit of decision making with ammo usage, because your ammo literally just comes in clips, and if you reload, you empty out the entirety of your current clip. So it's like, if a clip is 15 bullets, and let's say you have like 3 bullets left in your current clip, you kind of have to decide, okay, am I gonna try to be as like efficient as possible and conserve these 3 bullets, or am I gonna let them go to waste because I might need more than 3 in the next encounter, and I don't want to have to reload in the middle of fighting an enemy. So it's like, even, it's not it doesn't really make the most sense why all those bullets would be emptied, but I think it makes for a really interesting decision making, with basically every gun. The issues I had with item management was, I think key items just need to have their own slots, because there was a lot of points where you had to grab a key item, which would take up an inventory slot, but you'd basically, like, pick up the key item, go put it where it needs to be, and then you'd basically have, like, free reign to just, like, walk back and pick up whatever, like, gun or weapon that you dropped to make room for the key item initially. So it just kind of made, like, little inconveniences like that were a little bit annoying. And I also think, speaking of annoying, I think once you reach like the second half of this game, I definitely feel like the level starts to deteriorate a little bit. The midpoint of this game, I believe the developer directly admitted they added backtracking to just pad out the game a little bit, and I did not enjoy it in the slightest. There were a couple interesting things when you revisit the apartment, like one of the first levels in the game, but overall this backtracking segment was like probably the lowest point of the game, and the levels after, I didn't particularly enjoy it that much either. And another thing is with the story, I think there were some really cool things, kind of similar to the Silent Hill games. There is like symbolism with some of the enemies and how they were like relate to the character. And like while you're going through the story, there's like some interesting points about like, you kind of get the hints that either this area is like this, what's going on in the game has to be, at least my suspicion, I will not confirm it, but it had to be some kind of like dream sequence or something, because Simon really never reacts. Similar to the Silent Hill protagonist, Simon pretty much never reacts and is like, oh my god, that's a horrifying monster trying to kill me. What is going on in this city? That's really something that is like almost never brought up. So I definitely had my suspicions that it was just like some kind of dream sequence or something. But what I think, so a lot of the stuff with that story was interesting, and I think like once you see the ending, I think it kind of it comes together pretty well. But one thing that really annoyed me with the story is they didn't really feel like there was rhyme or reason to why you're doing what you're doing. Kind of similar to like the first chunk of Silent Hill 3. Where it's like, I mean, both of them, the goal is get home, but why we're taking this specific path to get home, I didn't really feel like invested in the decision-making there for that. So that felt like a little bit annoying, but I feel like the kind of like trying to piece together what is really happening incentivized me to keep going. And overall the story felt like it ended nicely. So I think, actually, I think Cry of Fear goes here with the Penumbra games. We got our 2 and only RPG Maker horror games on this list here. The first being Ao Oni, which is one of the older but very, very well-known RPG Maker horror games. A very like simple setup where you and a bunch of your high school friends go to explore some seemingly spooky mansion, and then the Ao Oni himself starts attacking you guys. The Oni actually felt very dynamic. I don't know if I want to use the word dynamic or random, but the Oni didn't feel like it followed a very specific set of rules, which either led to fear that the Oni could appear anywhere at any time, or it led to frustration because the Oni felt like it appeared or disappeared really without any reason, to the point where it literally being unrealistic how the Oni is like chasing after you and then teleports in front of you to chase after you the other way. Though during these like sections where the Oni shows up and is chasing you, there is like a sense of panic because there isn't like a 100% consistent way to avoid the Oni. You have to be like quick on your feet and like make sure you either find some sort of safe place or just like outrun the Oni and hope he stops giving chase. There's also, like, hiding places don't work every time. Or, like, hiding places don't work if the Oni has seen you go into it, or, I believe, on repeat times. So it definitely does give the sense that, like, the Oni isn't just, like, some random scripted monster. Like, there is some kind of intelligence going on there. Like with a lot of these RPG Maker horror games, they are typically very, besides the horror, they're very puzzle-focused. And the puzzles felt, like, okay. I don't think I was a big fan of all of them, but they felt okay. Some of them felt a little bit annoying. The atmosphere and maps, for the time, are very good. I don't really think they particularly hold up, especially compared to, like, some of the other really popular RPG Maker horror games, but is, like, respectable for the time. And I'm trying to think where I want to put it. It's a free-to-play game, and it'll last you, like, 2 to 3 hours. I feel like it goes... I don't think I enjoyed it enough to put it in Godlike, but I still think it's really good, and it's one I'd, like, very easily recommend to people. I think it sits there. And now for our one other RPG Maker classic horror game, we have Misao, which is actually made by the same developer that made Mad Father, which is another RPG Maker horror classic. Kind of the premise for this game is a girl that has gone missing. A girl that went missing, I believe, a couple months previous to the game's events, is apparently now haunting the school and has trapped you and a couple other classmates inside. Oh, plus one of the teachers. And you're basically tasked with kind of putting the girl, her name is Misao, like the title. And you're kind of tasked with saving the other people that are trapped there and hopefully putting Misao's spirit at rest. And this one is very interesting because, like, it feels like it kind of sets up the atmosphere pretty well for a horror game, but this is the funniest RPG Maker horror game I've played because there is, like, 50 ways or so. I don't remember the exact number. There's, like, I want to say it's like 50 or so. There's, like, 50 or so ways that you can die in this game. A lot of them, okay, so like what this game does is it sets up a very easy to use autosave feature. You can literally, it's like a hotkey autosave button. You can use it at literally any time. You're just like not in like dialogue or a set sequence. So you can use it at any time, and it basically is there to like offset how easy it is to die in this game. How easy it is to die and how many varied deaths there are is, I think, makes this game extremely entertaining. I can't confirm, because, like, this is the same one that made Mad Father, one that, like, genuinely feels like it's trying to make you feel uncomfortable all throughout the game. But Misao here is, like, one of the very first early deaths in the game is, like, if you sit down at like, you see there's writing at a desk, so of course, like, it's, like, the only desk with writing on it, of course you're gonna go over. You sit down, this desk is cursed, and then a ghost comes out and kills you from the desk. And it's like, it feels comedic. I don't feel like this game is going for, like, as similar as a vibe when you're trying to, like, just explore these areas and you can literally die at any moment. To be clear, I like, think there's, like, a plus for the game. No, I don't think it has to be super spooky all the time. It makes exploration extremely entertaining. It has me asking the question, how am I gonna die next? Because it's probably gonna be very funny. So I really enjoyed that part of it. I think that was the highlight of Misao for me. How many ways can I die? And there's literally a place that keeps track of how many of the deaths you have experienced. There is the actual puzzles going on through the game. And those I still enjoyed quite a bit. Again, like these RPG Maker horror games typically are. There's a big emphasis on puzzles for progression. And this game is also very open with how you need to progress. There's essentially 6 key items you need to get to complete the game, and I'm pretty sure you can tackle them in any order you want. Or at the very least, if there's ever like one puzzle that's giving you trouble, there is always some other not fully explored area of the school you can go to and make some progress there. And also, this game is very funny when it comes to the deaths, but I think does a good job at being serious when it comes to like progressing the main story and kind of discovering the history of what happened to Misao. And like the other kids you're trapped with, you learn about how they bully her. And like these bully characters, oh man. I forget what the dev's name is, but they did a really good job making these like absolutely irredeemable characters. So it definitely like gets serious and uncomfortable when it wants to be. So it does a good job like balancing both of those. I'm trying to think, did I enjoy Misao as much of these? I feel like I'll put Misao at the bottom of Godlike. I don't know if these are necessarily ordered. Then we have our one and only DLC that is on this list, but it was this pretty substantial content of DLC, so I feel like it validates its spot here. The Resident Evil Village Shadows of Rose DLC. This comes as a big package, but the main thing there is this the Shadows of Rose campaign itself, which is a sequel to Resident Evil Village, where you see Rose all grown up, or not all grown up, she's a teenager now, and she basically kind of has to she's trying to get rid of her powers, basically. And you also get a little bit of a sequel for Ethan, as I feel like Ethan didn't really need as a continuation of his story, but he gets a little bit extra here. But their main focus on it is on Rose. And I feel like it's a little interesting, because it kind of sets up, if we're going like 16 years into the future after Resi Village, how they want to continue the Resident Evil storyline. If they want to keep going down this path with the Winters, I feel like it's fine, but at the same time, I feel like Rose didn't really need a story. Unless they really want to explore. It's really hard to talk about the premise for this without spoiling Resi Village. But kind of like the revelation about Ethan, and kind of what that means for Rose, is like, okay, they kind of, if they want to address that, and like the powers Rose has, it's like, okay, that's fine. Essentially what the gameplay provides you is two big levels that kind of mirror the first 2 big sections from the main Resident Evil Village game, where you start out in Castle Dimitrescu. It literally is the same this time around. Or it is literally just Castle Dimitrescu this time around. And you have to basically collect the key items to get to the end. There's fighting a lot of enemies as you're going through. This felt like a very light version of this section from Village. There's not a lot of exploration. It's still like there's a couple extra things you can find here and there, but it's overall very, very, very linear. There's not a lot of enemy variety, not a lot of weapon variety, but you get a couple unique powers that only Rose has that Ethan didn't in the first game, and you can use those a little bit. Overall, it didn't feel like you had a lot of great options at your disposal. And then sometimes there was a little bit of like cheap tactics you could use while just like waiting around for the enemies. We got like a very like light version of what this section was in the main game, which was like okay. But the second section was again mirrors like the dollhouse section of Resi Village, and that section of Resi Village is like one of my most enjoyable parts of like any horror game. So I'm very glad to see a similar kind of design come out for a horror experience. And overall, I loved the first half of this section. Felt really, really good. Again, I kind of get that feeling of like the game understanding what the player is feeling and like getting in your head to scare you. And it was really funny because the main game of Resi Village is in first person, and then the Shadows of Rose DLC is in third person. And I remember saying during this section. I was like, it's in third person. It probably isn't going to scare me as much. And then, yeah, it got to me. It ended up getting to me. I ate my own words. Very much enjoyed, like, again, it felt like they did a really good job at getting into your head. And then they had a very enjoyable and interesting, like, chase sequence that did a really good job, like, evolving on ideas and building on top of each other to, like, ramp up the difficulty as well, while making you, like, feel uncomfortable. The second bit of the second level didn't feel as good, but still, like, overall, I really love the second section of the DLC more than the first. And then it does its best to, like, give a little bit of backstory to Rose, which honestly, like, Rose's backstory felt very, like, cartoonish. Overall, I wasn't the most invested in her backstory, but kind of does their best to, like, give her a little bit of development, which I enjoyed. Give a little bit extra for Ethan. And I'm interested to see where Capcom wants to take the Resident Evil series from here. My main gripe with this DLC is it's like a 3-ish hour long DLC, but they're making you pay like $30 for it. Let me get the exact price right now. Yeah, the Winters' expansion pass costs $30. And the Winters' expansion pass also comes, there's 30 Canadian to be clear, so there's like 25 US. But it also, along with this, like Shadows of Rose, it comes with third person for the main game, and then playing as Lady Dimitrescu in Mercenaries mode. But it did not at all feel worth it. I feel like the main reason you're buying this is the Shadows of Rose DLC. And it sucks that they've, like, basically tied in what feels like not very meaningful additions to the Winters' expansion to what kind of feels like artificially drive up the price of this. So, yeah, it's something I can really only recommend getting on a sale. It goes in one of these two tiers. I think I'm gonna put it here because of the price. If this wasn't, like, I wish they'd just sell the Shadows of Rose DLC on its own, like, knock out the third person and Lady Dimitrescu and save the players, like, I don't know, $10. I'm sure they put a lot of effort into, like, developing both that and the third person mode, but, like, I don't see why people have to buy those if this is just what they want to play. Now, our second final game of the list here is Nioh, which I gotta put a big asterisk here, because I've only done the main game, and I played through essentially the entirety of it in co-op. So, probably different than a lot of other people's experiences with Nioh. This game, at first, presents itself very similarly to Dark Souls. There's a lot of differences. But I feel like its initial, like, presentation, it sets it up similarly to Dark Souls. Because, like, the level progression throughout this game, it's like, it's got the classic bonfire where you heal and level up as you slowly try to go through the levels. I didn't really deal with this system because I was playing in co-op, but again, that is like how the game generally presents itself. The stance system was it presents a lot of things very early on that I thought were interesting, such as like the stance system. We basically get different movesets if you're doing like low, medium, or high stance, which is kind of like light, medium, and heavy attacks. And the game also gives you very big skill trees for every single kind of weapon, as well as a couple miscellaneous ones for kind of like magic and buffs and such. So it gives you a lot of options for what you can do, even early on. I do think the skills could have been a little bit more easy to navigate the menu and be a little bit less overwhelming to a new player that doesn't have, like, either someone like me who had someone there that could, like, tell me, okay, these are the skills you for sure want no matter what. But it felt like a little bit overwhelming, but the flip side is it does give you a really good amount of variety, again, even early on. And the combat still feels, like, pretty good. Again, like, presents similarly to Dark Souls, but definitely expects a lot different from you compared to those games, while still maintaining that, like, committal actions, learn enemy patterns, third-person combat style. The main issues I have with this game is the repetition with both levels and enemy variety. It was my choice to actively do, I believe, all or almost all of the side missions, but almost all the side missions pretty much, like, will reuse maps from main missions. And it's like you're almost never gonna come across a mission where there's a map used just there. And as well as the enemy variety. Well, like a lot of, like, most of the enemies aren't bad or anything, but you just, like, there's really not that many enemies. And it creates, like, a severe lack of variety as you're fighting the same ones just, like, all throughout the game. It makes me more want to, like, play Nioh 2, because I've heard a lot of my issues get fixed in that game. So it has me, I don't know when I'm gonna get to it, but whenever I do, I am, like, going in cautiously optimistic. Yeah, the story in Nioh 1 was, like, interesting because, like, it has, like, a whole bunch of cutscenes that's, like, kind of present, like, what's actively going on. I had literally no clue what was going on basically throughout the entirety of the game. But Nioh overall, I feel like goes in the good tier. I feel like that's a relatively safe place to put it. And then now we have our very last game on the list here. The game we played at the start of tonight's stream, and that is Choo-Choo Charles. This game came out just this month, and who made this game? 2-Star Games. Yeah, Choo-Choo Charles just came out literally at the tail end of 2022. It is an indie horror game where basically you've been summoned to this island and tasked with defeating the titular Charles himself. This is also the only game I do not have notes for because I did not play it until this stream. So I'll be going a little bit on the fly here, trying to do my best to recall my experience as an overall thoughts. You've basically been tasked with taking down Charles, and you're given a train right at the start, and you use this train to navigate around the island. You can do various fetch quests for a lot of different NPCs, and these basically give you access to either plot progression items, new weapons to defend yourself from Charles with, or just give you scrap that you can upgrade your train with. And basically you just kind of explore the island to slowly get yourself armed and ready to take down Charles. And overall, I really like this game. It feels like a lot of really big positives with it, and I feel like one of the big things is just Charles itself as this giant monster. Not exactly like the kind of scariest looking monster. It's kind of goofy being a spider train. But yeah, Charles, the monster of Charles itself is definitely one of the big highlights of this. Where basically, like, while you're exploring the island, Charles kind of just, like, wanders around seemingly at random. Charles never feels like a scripted encounter. It's like, oh shit, at any moment, Charles can just show up and heck up my day. And you have to spend resources and, like, try to use your weapons to fend off Charles until, like, he decides to go back off into the wilderness, when you're again just, like, back on the edge of your seat. When could that happen again? And I feel like this worked especially well in the early game, where your resources are limited. Because you have to spend scrap to either upgrade your train or also restore its health if it's taken damage. So I feel like that aspect was done really well, where, like, because I remember like Chow was saying, like, well, don't heal your train, just take the damage and the scrap loss from death. But it, like, felt really interesting. I feel like as you went more into the game, you're given a lot more tools to really not as easily die to Charles. You have to, like, still be on your game, because there's, like, actively make sure Charles is, like, being fended off, being shot away from your train as you're trying to run away. But in the, like, the more you go through, the less Charles really felt like a threat, because you're just, like, you're amassing so much scrap metal. If Charles attacks your train, who cares? So I feel like that was especially done well early on in the game. But still, kind of no matter what, there's still this, like, ever-looming feeling of, like, Charles is out there. When is he gonna show up? Because it's not even like, is Charles gonna show up? Because you know it's gonna happen. You just don't know when. So I'm very interested in the AI of Charles and how that might work. But that was definitely the big highlight. A lot of the NPCs, it was a little interesting seeing the inhabitants of the island. Slowly get to know them a little bit. The actual quests they give you aren't particularly interesting. They're literally all fetch quests. They're like, grab this item for me, I'll give you some scrap metal. I mean, yeah, and then there's some of them that are like, okay, I'll give you this weapon after. And all the weapons greatly expand to your arsenal at defending yourself from Charles. And of course, there's the few story quests, which basically task you to going inside inside some kind of underground enemy base to steal an egg, steal one of Charles's eggs. And those eggs are the main plot progression items of the game. And oh my god, dealing with the human enemies felt very annoying, because if they ever so much catch the slightest glance of you, they're gonna chase you to the ends of the earth. So whenever that happened, I'd either like take them back to the train so I could kill them, or I just like keep running and just like grab the key item, or just like keep running with the train and leave. So like dealing with the human enemies felt very annoying, but it was cool kind of like exploring the island a little bit. The characters aren't like amazing or anything, but sometimes they act like a little bit quirky, but it was like still pretty good. My main issue with Choo-Choo Charles is I'd absolutely love to see something like this on a greater scope or in like a longer game, but this game took, my Steam out is saying 2.3 hours, which is like not the worst ratio, but this game costs $25, 25 Canadian dollars, so I think like 20 US. But yeah, there's not really like, you're gonna play this game for 3 hours max, not a lot of replayability. It's a very enjoyable experience for those couple hours, but there's like, once you beat the game, there really isn't too much to do after. I believe there are a couple sections of the island I did not get to explore, but at least going off of the Steam achievements here, I've pretty much done everything the game has to offer just in those couple hours. And I literally did every single NPC mission that is available. So it's like, it offers you a very solid and enjoyable couple hours just for a price that I don't know is entirely worth it depending on who you are. Like, you can buy the game for, like, I don't know, if you're fast enough, you can buy this game and successfully, like, beat it within the refund window. If you don't, like, go take your time and do absolutely everything. So I feel like it's similar to Shadows of Rose, where it's like, I don't really, I feel like you might want to wait for a sale or some kind of price drop. But I feel like I enjoyed Choo-Choo Charles a lot more. So I think I put it up here. I'll just make a tier for them. We'll make this big tier list. I'll probably wait for sale due to length. Okay, I think this is good. This isn't like, this definitely does not mean this is below the bad tier. This is just a kind of, actually, can I move this? I'm going to move this tier up. Because I think I enjoyed these more than these. That's Choo-Choo Charles. Yeah, I think this is the list here. We got like Umineko and Fortnite 2 at the top here. I think those like, they just like stand out the most. Like Amnesia, Iron Lung, and Unsorted VHS, all very great horror games. Lobotomy Corporation, very unique management game, and then Misao is a very funny horror game. Yeah, a lot of variety here with the really good tier. I might be able to split this, but I think having these be above all of these, I'm happy with that. Penumbra games plus Cry of Fear. Definitely just like taking issues with these games a little bit more than the ones up here. Yeah, these are here, but I really like these, but they're too short. Both Choo-Choo Charles and Shadows of Rose feel too short to really recommend for their current price points at like 2 and 3 hours respectively. Yeah, these ones all have really good points, just more issues than the ones that are above here. Silent Hill 1 and 2 and Little Nightmares just kind of felt like okay experiences. And then yeah, Fatal Frame 2, Silent Hill 3, and then East 2. I feel like are games I very much felt like I was forcing myself to keep going through. This is my list of the games I played in 2022. How many do we have in total here? Okay, so 31 games here. 31 games played in 2022. I think this is a decent chunk more than last year. And also, streaming more definitely helped me like get through a lot of single-player games, and hopefully we'll see more of the same in 2023.